In this video, we're going to go over a few simple rules of composition and see how they have a huge impact on the beauty of our images. Prior to this, we learned how to create a well-exposed and a well-focused image with our DSLR cameras. Now this is probably a huge improvement over what you were getting before with the green auto setting on your DSLR, but it's still not giving you that beautiful image that you've always dreamt of. So what's the missing puzzle piece? Great composition. Now, there are hundreds of books out there that talk about all different sorts of rules of composition and how you can break those different rules. And that's great for some people. But when you're first starting out in photography, you already have so many things to remember. And having to sit there and think about hundreds of different rules of composition is just going to really confuse you and frustrate you. So instead, what I've gone ahead and done is distilled it down to just a few couple really important rules that are going to give you the greatest bang for your buck. So let's go ahead and go over these couple rules of composition and see how they're going to have a huge impact on your images. One of the very most important things to do when composing your shot is to look at your backgrounds to see if anything looks like it's growing out of your subject's head. So in this situation, if I was to take this shot right now, sure enough, these trees would look like they're growing right out of his head. And that's extremely distracting. Now ideally, we usually would just not pose someone in front of there. But sometimes you don't have that choice. They're stuck and we have to pose somebody in front of an object that we're not particularly thrilled with the background. But while your subject may be stuck there, you yourself as the photographer can move. So what that means is you can move side to side, down, or up. Even sometimes go ahead, get a ladder or a step stool, some item like that. So let's see the difference in these shots when we do this, and let's see how I move. So first I'm just going to move left and right and see how it changes the perspective. All right, let's go ahead. Here we start off with that tree right behind him. And now, if I just move ever so slightly this way, and voila, no more trees growing out of his head. Okay, let's see the other way. Do we like it perspective-wise better this way? Oh, I think that is perfect now. Just like that. No more trees, great background. And you can see my subject hasn't moved one bit. All right, now let's see the perspective difference of when I go down further lower to see how things change and look. All right. All right, now at this position, by going lower, we can actually see we have something growing right out of his head. That's not flattering. So we're going to move around and try it in a different spot. There we go. Notice how this is a completely different look to him from me being below him. He looks far more powerful from above like that. And as you can see, overall, this makes a huge difference in how our shots look. So be sure to go ahead and check your backgrounds. And if your background isn't something you like, go ahead, move your subject, take them somewhere else. This will make a massive difference in how your shots look. If you just take those couple seconds to look at the background around you and see what's available as a background to you, go ahead, place your subject in the best one possible, and as soon as you frame up your shot, go ahead and look and check those backgrounds to see if anything is there that's going to be really distracting. One of the most well-known and classic rules of composition is the rule of thirds. Typically, when people first start in photography, they don't follow this rule at all. What they end up doing is just bringing their camera up to their eye, placing the subject dead center, and taking the shot. Now, that's great if you have beautiful symmetry on either side of your subject that brings the attention right dead center. But most of the time that's not the case, and it just makes your composition really boring. So instead, what the rule of thirds suggests that you do is to place your subject on the different thirds of the image. So what does that mean? It means if we go ahead and place a grid on our image, that we can go ahead and look and see where these different lines cross. Where those different lines cross is the area that our brain is going to find most interesting. So if we go ahead and put the areas of interest in our shot right there on those crosses, we're going to find that image to be far more dynamic and interesting. So, in the case of, say, taking a shot at the beach, if what's really interesting is a beautiful sunset, instead of putting the horizon line dead center in the middle, instead I'll make sure to put the horizon line down along the bottom third, and that way we have the beautiful sunset up at the top that's featured. If in fact the action was really interesting that was on the bottom part of the beach, I would put the horizon line on the top third instead. In the case of, say, doing a portrait, we want to make sure that overall we have the eye line right across here going across the top horizon there. You'll find if you go ahead and observe these parts and really try to compose your images with having interesting elements falling on these different crosses and intersections of lines that divide your image up into thirds, you're going to have far more dynamic compositions, and that will overall really improve your photos. An important rule of composition that is often lost on beginners in photography is to fill the frame. When people usually start out with photography, what they're most concerned about doing is just taking pictures of people from head to toe. They're trying to get the overall picture of what's going on in the situation. That's great to have some of these shots. We call them establishing shots to show what's going on. But at the end of the day, you'll often find that the shots that you connect with most are shots that are far closer in. So what I encourage you to do is to zoom with your feet. What that means is, when you think you're close enough, go even closer to your subject. Go ahead, start by taking those shots zoomed out the way you normally would, but then either use your lens to zoom in and then go ahead and move even closer to your subject so that you can go and get those tight shots that really fill the frame with your subject. I think you'll end up being very pleased with what you create. When it comes to action shots, you might think that composition would be one of the last things you should think about. But in fact, it's one of the most important because it will have a huge impact on how dynamic that shot is. How do we make a shot more dynamic with action? We make sure that the action is leading into the frame and not out of the frame. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you have your subject and they're going in one particular direction, if they are going and leading outwards towards the outside edge of the frame, your brain, when it views that image, is going to be left going, wait, what happens next? It's run out of frame there to see what's going to happen, and it leaves us dissatisfied. But if you have the action leading into the frame, your brain feels like it has a certain amount of space available for it to be able to picture what's going to happen next. It doesn't feel jarring or cut off, and that makes the image far more pleasing to the eye. So how do we accomplish this? We go ahead and make sure that we're using our continuous focus mechanism on our camera, and then we go ahead and pick one of our focus points that is appropriate for the way that the action is moving. So if it's moving down the field that way, I would make sure that I select the focus point that's over here on this side so that I'm tracking my subject on this side, so that overall I'm making sure that they're not going out of my frame. If the subject is going this direction, again, I would switch my focus point there over to this side so that I'm tracking my subject on this side as they move in that direction. This will make a huge impact in your action photography because you won't be sitting there and having to crop things afterwards, just trying to make sure that people are overall being in that leading line of towards the inside of your frame rather than leading out of your frame.